Hi, welcome to Nina in the Kitchen, where today we're making one of my favorite things, which is pie crust. A lot of people have trouble with pie crust. It slouches in the pan, or it's crumbly but not flaky, or it's just gloppy. And if you have any of those problems, I'm going to go over everything today, so stick around for this. There are 3 ways to make pie crust. You can take the fat, which I have in here, put it into a bowl or on your work surface and mix it into the flour with your fingertips. You don't want to touch your hands to it because your hands are hot, so you want to use your fingertips only, and you can massage the butter or the fat into the flour mix. And that works, but this is really the best method. Another way to go is you can use a pastry cutter, put your flour into a bowl and add your fat to that, and take your pastry cutter and slice through it until you get little pieces of pea-sized fat. Another way you can do that if you don't have a pastry cutter is just use 2 knives and just go through with 2 knives. My favorite way, because it makes short work of this, is my good old food processor. So I have 1.5 cups of flour in here. I'm going to show you how to properly measure for pastries. You don't swoop into your flour container with your cup, because when you do that, you pack your flour in here and you'll put too much flour into the dough right away and you can't recover from that. So the best way to do it is to take a scoop and put that into your cup and then swoop it off. Just like that. Now, if you feel that you can't, maybe you have an odd-shaped cup, or you feel that maybe you didn't get into the corners, you can put your flour in and then take a blade, doesn't have to be a scoop, and just sort of pat it in there and then swoop it off, just to make sure that you have actually 1 cup. Another way to go is to measure by weight. In here I have 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt. If you're not making a sweet pie, if you're doing a meat pie, for example, chicken pot pie or beef pie, you can leave the sugar out and it won't harm the recipe whatsoever. You're good to go. So I'm just going to blend these dry ingredients together with 2 pulses. And your pulses are always 1-second pulses. So now the fat goes in. This fat has been in the freezer for about 30 minutes. You can keep it chilled in your refrigerator. I like it really, really cold. So this is 2 sticks of butter. And I also have, this was kind of a happy accident one day. This is a pâte brisée, and what that is an all butter crust. It's a French crust. I like to add a little shortening to it because you can't believe how much more flakiness you get from this. Now, what happens, and the reason that you want this chilled so much, is because those flakes of pastry are created by the fat that sizzles in the oven, if you will, and creates steam, and that is what pushes out your dough and makes a flaky pastry. So I'm going to give this about 8 or 9 pulses. We'll see how it goes. And those bigger pieces are what's going to make the pastry nice and fluffy and light. So that's where I'm going to stop. And now I'm going to add some flour. This will take, it's 2.5 cups of flour. So this will take about 1/3 to 1/2 cup of water. This is ice water. You don't want to let the ice go in there. And I don't put it through the feed tube anymore. I used to do that, but I find that it all congeals right around the blade. So now what I do is I make a well with my finger right around the periphery, and not on the outside edge, and I pour my water into that well. Now I'm going to do about 4 pulses. It's starting to clump together, and I know through experience that I will need just a little more water. You can see some of this is still floury, and some of it is clumping nicely. This is perfect, and let me show you what we have. I have some pieces that still look dry. Do you see that? They're falling down by the side of the bowl. But if I pick those up and add them to the stuff that's towards the center of the bowl, the dough, and pick it up, you'll see that it feels like Play-Doh, and it congeals. It's keeping my hands clean, but it's tacky. I have a little bit there. It's tacky, so it's not too wet. Ready? So at this point, the dough's ready to come out of the food processor. I take 2 pieces of plastic wrap, and I overlap them by just a couple of inches. One of the nice things about making your own pie crust, is that not only is the flavor and texture something that you just can't purchase, but you can customize the flavor. So for example, if you're making an apple pie, I've put cheddar cheese into the crust, and I've also done, if I have apple cider, that can go in. If you're doing a coconut custard pie, maybe you'd put a little grated, unsweetened coconut in here. So you can play around with this quite a bit. Nuts is a delicious addition to a pie. So you can coordinate your flavors with your filling. And now at this point, all that I'm going to do is get the blade out of here, and I'm going to put this all together. I'm going to make sure that it congeals and put it in the refrigerator. I'm going to use the plastic wrap. I'm going to push this all together. So this is one cohesive piece of dough. This is going to go into the refrigerator, just like this, for at least an hour. Now at this point, if you want to separate this, it's not a bad idea. You can use a scale for that. This is enough dough to make one pie with a bottom crust and a top crust. You can also do 1 or 2 9-inch pies with single crusts, like for an apple or pumpkin pie rather. So, and since that's what I'm going to do, I think divide and conquer. I'm going to separate this dough and weigh it out. That way I know that I have 2 even pieces. 12.9 and 13.1. Pretty good. That's close enough for me. These are a nice little disc shape. When the hour is up in the fridge, we can roll these out. You can also keep this in the refrigerator for about 2 days. So this is a good do-ahead, and you can freeze them. Another way to freeze them, which is really pretty cool, is first roll it out, then with between 2 pieces of plastic wrap, fold them into quarters, and then you can stack them in a freezer bag, just one crust stacked on the next. And you can keep these crusts for, you know, anything you read will say a month. I've kept them for 3 months, and they're perfectly fine. It's been 1 hour, and I'm back. Here's the dough. I made it into 2 separate discs and put them in the fridge. And this is malleable. As you can see, it's not frozen or not very, very hard. And that's actually a good thing, because you want it to roll out evenly and easily. But if you look at this, you can see the little bits of fat in here, and all of those pieces of fat is what's going to sizzle in the oven and create layers of flaky pastry. Rule of thumb with pastry making, no matter what it is, if you're doing croissant or pie crust, is work cold and bake hot. But you don't want the cold fat to be so cold that it shatters. Okay, moving on. We have 2 different pie pans. And depending on what you're doing will depend on which one of these you want. If you're doing a single crust, which is what we're going to do today, single crust would be for a pumpkin pie, a pecan pie, key lime pie, things like that. And we're going to blind bake this pie crust. And what that means is it's going into the oven without anything in here, without a filling. And then you partially bake it. When the pie crust comes out, then you fill it, and then it goes back into the oven, and you finish your pie. The reason for doing that is you don't want a soggy bottom to a pie, and if you do a pie crust on a wet pie, like a pumpkin pie, you're going to have a wet bottom to this unless you pre-bake it. So that's why you do it. Now, these are 2 different pie plates. This one has a higher end than this one. This is the true pie plate. This one is a great pie plate for a covered pie or anything where you don't want a very decorative edge. For example, this has an edge that comes right here. From here down is 1.5 inches. And then you have this lip. Well, you can't really build a fluted edge on this, for example, whereas on this one, this goes down 1.5 inches, and then you have a lip that goes off to the side. This is where you can build that fluted edge. So we're going with this pie plate today. I have a rolling pin that is tapered. I like using these. You can use the American one with the 2 pins on the side. It really doesn't matter. Whatever you have will work. You can even use a wine bottle. So I'm rolling my pin. I have a little flour on the work surface. And I have a pastry brush. And that is for when I decide I've maybe put a little too much on there. Now, what you do is you roll away from yourself. And you move your crust. Roll away and turn. Roll away and turn. And the reason for doing this is you don't want to work your dough back and forth because that will develop the gluten. And you just do this, rolling and turning, until you have about a 13-inch diameter on this crust, and that will be what will fit a 9-inch pan. Okay. At this point, this is ready to go into the pie pan. Now, if you're not sure about this rolling method, then by all means you can roll between 2 pieces of parchment or between 2 pieces of waxed paper. Whatever you're comfortable with is fine. I like doing this because I like to feel exactly what's going on with the dough. But hey, whatever floats your boat. So now we're just going to make sure that this pie crust is going up the sides of this pan and gets to the very bottom. Just make sure that you're getting all the crevices. And the best way to get rid of this overhang, and you want about 1 inch of overhang from the edge of the pie pan, you want about 1 inch out. So we're just going to cut around. Now this is homemade, so this is not going to be perfect, and you're going to have some places where you have a little more pie crust than other places, and that's fine. All of this stuff can be your patchwork. If you have a hole in the bottom, I'll just make a hole. If you have a hole in the bottom, no one's going to see that, right? So you just take a little piece of your pie crust and you can patch it, and no one will know it's there. What you want to do on this edge is lift it up and tuck it under. Up and under. Anything that has the potential to spill, you're creating a dam by putting in this fluted edge. So, and it's a classic and it's a beautiful edge. Okay, at this point I've tucked everything under. Now I'm just going back around and I'm going to make this stand upright. Now you may, depending on how warm your kitchen is, you may end up having to put this back in the fridge. I'm just going to keep going. And I'm going to do a flute. So what that is you take your thumb and then the index finger and your thumb of your non-dominant hand. So I'm right-handed. I'm using my thumb to make the indent and I'm pinching around my thumb with my index finger and thumb of my left hand. Yes, it is getting a little too soft. That's okay. I'm just going to use a little flour. I've just finished making the fluted edge all the way around. So now I'm going to do what's called docking, and that's where you take a fork and you just prick around the sides of your pie shell, and you can do the bottom as well. If I'm doing a wet filling, I typically don't do very many pricks on the bottom of this, but at this point I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap, and this is going into the freezer for 30 minutes before it goes into the oven. The oven, I'm going to turn that on at 400, how to blind bake. The reason for blind baking is, this just came out of the freezer by the way, the reason for blind baking is so that you never have a soggy bottom. Unless you're a peat farmer in Ireland, I don't know why anyone would want a soggy bottom to anything. So this is our pie shell. What I'm going to do is put weight in it, put it in the oven, bring it out after about 30 minutes. It's going to be partially baked. At that point, I'm going to put a little bit of egg wash on the bottom of the pan, and I even go around the sides. What the egg wash does is it seals the deal, basically. It will seal the crust so that whatever wet ingredients you're putting in won't penetrate the crust and make it soggy. So it's just like an insurance policy on your crust. So here's what we do to blind bake. I've tried foil. I like parchment much better. The parchment, once you crumple it, fits very nicely into a pie pan. And it gives you a nice strong sling when the pie comes out so that you can pull these edges up with the pie weights in it. Now for pie weights, I have beans that I've had for about 10 years. You can use rice, you can use ceramic weight, you can use beans. And what you do, you can even use pennies, because penny, having copper in it, is actually a great conductor. So what you can do is push these beans all the way up against the walls, because I want to make sure that there are no gaps between the parchment and the beans. And what this does is it holds the structure. Now you have a partially frozen pie shell, and the structure is not going, with the beans and the freezing, it's not going to slouch back down into your pan. Regardless of what pan you use, you should always put it on a sheet tray, because pies can make a mess. They can spill on you, and to try to have oven mitts or gloves or whatever it is you're trying to bring out of the oven, to try to pick it up, this tiny little thing, to try to pick this little thing up, can create a dangerous situation where you can burn yourself. So tray is much better, much safer. Also with a glass pan, you don't want to put a glass pan into a 400-degree oven when it's frozen. So I like having the aluminum there as a little buffer to the extreme heat that it's going into. So let me get this in the oven. This is going to take 30 minutes, and I'll show you. The pie crust just came out of the oven. So what you do is you lift off these weights. Those go into a heat-proof bowl. And here's the pie crust. Now this is called a partially baked crust. And you can see it's just starting to become a golden brown. And at this point, I do two things. If I'm going to fully bake it, or even if I'm going to add an interior, a filling to this right now, you paint it with egg white. And the egg white will protect this crust from becoming a soggy bottom. And it's just going to keep on crisping. So at this point, I will put this in for another 5 to 7 minutes. And that will be our partially baked crust. And I'll see you when that comes out. It's been another 6 minutes, and I took this crust out. Ouch. It's been another 6 minutes. I just took this crust out, and you can see it's no longer wet on the bottom. The glisten that's there is the egg white, and it's just beginning to lightly brown all around the edges. Oh, I just broke it. Oh well, it's just us. So at this point, you can put a, oh goodness, key lime pie, sweet potato pie filling, pumpkin pie, pecan pie. And if you do that, depending on the temperature that you're running it at, you risk actually browning this a little too dark. So here's a trick that I do. I take a sheet of aluminum foil, which I know will more than cover the pie pan, and fold it in half. And then I just put the indentation of where the pie plate is. So now I know where the pie plate touches. I just leave about an inch border, and I cut all the way around it. I cut around the semicircle. Then what I do is I'll put this all around the edge. And if you have a filling in here, this will just rest on the filling. You crimp it all around the edges, and then on the corners of the foil, you actually twist like this. And you want to make a nice tight fit all the way around. Now, you can go out and buy pie shields, but then you have pie shields that you need to store and clean, and I don't do that. This is much easier. And that will protect your pie crust from burning. Now, I know that at this point, this going back into the oven has the structure set up so that it will not slouch back into the pan. I know that just by the look of this, that this is a nice flaky crust. It is really good. Pâte brisée, I'm telling you, it's a good crust. And that little bit of additional shortening makes the recipe. I hope that you enjoy your newfound way to make pie crust, and I hope that you stop buying pie crusts. It's awful when you go to a beautiful buffet, a beautiful holiday dinner, and people they took the time to make the filling, and then they went out and bought the pie crust, and it's just not great. This pie crust, perfecto. So I hope you try it. Please let me know if you do, and thanks for watching. Bye guys.